The mirror reflected a perfect bride, but Kate Taylor's blue eyes told a completely different story. She stood in the center of Manhattan's most exclusive boutique, surrounded by yards of French silk and Belgian lace, while three seamstresses adjusted every detail of a dress that cost more than her 2-year salary. The dress was stunning, a dream in ivory that embraced her curves with royal elegance, making her golden blonde hair shimmer like spun sunlight against the delicate fabric. But it weighed on her shoulders like armor she had never chosen to wear. "Perfect!" exclaimed Madame Dubois, the French stylist, clapping her hands with theatrical enthusiasm. "You will be the most beautiful bride in all of New York, ma chérie." Kate forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 3 weeks ago, she was just a 28-year-old literature teacher sharing a tiny Brooklyn apartment with her best friend, dreaming of publishing her first novel. Today, she was being prepared to marry one of the most powerful men in the country. Everything changed on that rainy Tuesday when she was grading papers at the corner cafe. 2 men in suits approached her table with a proposal that sounded straight out of a movie. $3 million to marry Richard Musk for exactly 3 months. After that, the divorce would be discreet. She would keep the money and he would solve some business problem involving inheritances and matrimonial contracts. What they didn't mention was that she wouldn't have a choice. "Miss Taylor?" The deep, familiar voice made her stomach tighten. Richard Musk stood at the boutique entrance, imposing in his $3,000 dark suit, his gray eyes analyzing every detail of the dress with the same coldness he used to analyze financial reports. "Mr. Musk," she replied, maintaining the neutral tone she had learned to use over the past weeks. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. I need to make sure everything is perfect for tomorrow," he said, dismissing the seamstresses with a wave. They left quickly, leaving them alone. 3,000 guests will be present. International press. We can't have unforeseen circumstances. Kate stepped down from the pedestal, the dress rustling around her like caged wings. Her blonde hair caught the boutique's crystal lighting, creating an almost ethereal glow that made the moment even more surreal. Unforeseen circumstances like me fainting at the altar, or running away. For the first time, she saw something that could be humor in his eyes, or perhaps it was just irritation. "You won't do either," he said, approaching until they were just inches apart, "because you understand what's at stake." Oh yes, she understood perfectly. Her sister Emma, only 16, was hospitalized at Boston's most expensive hospital, fighting a rare form of leukemia. The experimental treatments cost a fortune that her middle-class family could never afford. When Richard's men appeared, they knew exactly which button to press. "Marry me for 3 months and your sister will have the best treatment available in the world," had been the offer. Refuse and, well, public hospitals do what they can. It wasn't exactly a request. "You're a monster," she whispered, but without the strength she wished to have in her voice. "I'm a businessman," he replied, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something wavering in his expression, but it was too quick. "And tomorrow, you'll be my wife." He turned to leave but stopped at the door. "For your own good, Kate, learn to smile for real by tomorrow. 3,000 people will be watching and all of them need to believe you're the happiest woman in the world." When he left, Kate looked at herself again in the mirror. The dress was still beautiful. She still looked like a fairy tale princess with her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. But now she could see the truth in her own blue eyes. She was about to marry the dragon, not the Prince Charming. And for some inexplicable reason that made her more furious than frightened. Because Kate Taylor had never been the type who accepts being saved. She had always been the type who fights back. And if Richard Musk thought he had bought himself a submissive wife, he was about to discover he had made the worst deal of his life. The war was just beginning, and she intended to win it using the only weapons she had, her intelligence, her determination, and the inconvenient ability to make even the most powerful men in the world question who was really in control. The wedding would be tomorrow. But who said she couldn't rewrite the rules of the game? The Cathedral of St. John the Divine had never looked more magnificent, or more like a beautiful prison. Kate stared at her reflection in the bridal suite's antique mirror, watching her makeup artist apply the final touches of lipstick that cost more per tube than most people's grocery budget. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo that took 3 hours to perfect, with delicate pearl pins catching the morning light streaming through stained glass windows. She looked like a princess from a Renaissance painting, all golden beauty and ethereal grace. Too bad princesses in fairy tales usually got to choose their own prince. "Breathe, darling," whispered her maid of honor, a woman she'd met exactly 48 hours ago, hired by Richard's team to play the role of her best friend from college. Even her wedding party was fake. "You look absolutely radiant." Radiant. Kate almost laughed. She felt more like a lamb being led to slaughter, albeit a very well-dressed one. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Taylor? It's time." Through the grand wooden doors, she could hear the murmur of 3,000 guests. Politicians, celebrities, business moguls, all here to witness what they believed was a love story. The organ began playing Wagner's traditional wedding march, each note echoing through the cathedral like a countdown to her doom. But as Kate walked down that impossibly long aisle, something unexpected happened. She saw him. Richard stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and for once the perpetual coldness in his gray eyes seemed different. Softer, maybe. When their eyes met across the sea of guests, she felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with something far more dangerous. "Focus, Kate. He's still the enemy." But then she noticed something that made her falter mid-step. In the third row, barely visible among the crowd of strangers, sat a young woman with short auburn hair and the same gray eyes as Richard. She was clapping enthusiastically, but there was something desperate in her expression, as if she needed this wedding to happen just as much as Richard did. Who was she? And why did she look so relieved? "You're beautiful," Richard murmured as Kate reached the altar, and for the first time his voice held no trace of the cold businessman she'd come to know. There was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it, as if the words had escaped without his permission. Kate's heart did an unwelcome little skip. Stop it. Just because he can turn on the charm doesn't mean anything. The ceremony began, and Kate found herself going through the motions like an actress in a play she'd never auditioned for. She recited her vows, words written by Richard's PR team about love and devotion that tasted like lies on her tongue. But when it came time for Richard to speak, something shifted. "Kate," he began, his eyes never leaving hers, "I promise to protect you, to honor the strength I see in you every day, and to—" He paused, something flickering across his face. "To be worthy of the trust you're placing in me today." That wasn't in the script. She was sure of it. The kiss came next, their first, and supposedly not their last, for the next 3 months. Kate braced herself for something cold and perfunctory, a business transaction sealed with reluctant contact. Instead, Richard's lips were warm and surprisingly gentle against hers. His hand cupped her face with unexpected tenderness, his thumb tracing her cheekbone as if she were something precious, rather than something purchased. For a moment that lasted both forever and not nearly long enough. Kate forgot where they were, forgot why they were there, forgot everything except the way her entire body seemed to wake up under his touch. The crowd erupted in applause, and reality came crashing back. What the hell was that? But there was no time to process. They were immediately swept into a receiving line that seemed to stretch for miles. Kate smiled and accepted congratulations from people whose names she'd never remember, all while hyper-aware of Richard's hand on her waist, warm and steady and utterly confusing. "Congratulations, Mrs. Musk," said a woman with kind eyes and a familiar voice. Kate turned to find herself face to face with the auburn-haired woman from the third row. "Thank you," Kate replied carefully. "I don't believe we've met." The woman's smile faltered slightly. "I'm Sarah, Richard's sister." Sister. The word hit Kate like a physical blow. In all her research about Richard Musk, and she had researched extensively, there had never been any mention of family. No siblings, No parents. Nothing personal at all. Sarah, Richard's voice was sharp, warning. What? I'm just introducing myself to my new sister-in-law, Sarah said innocently, but Kate caught the meaningful look that passed between the siblings. I'm so glad you found someone who makes you happy, Richie. Richie? Kate bit back a smile despite everything. The idea of anyone calling the intimidating Richard Musk Richie was almost worth this entire surreal situation. But then Sarah leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Kate's ears. Thank you. I know the circumstances aren't ideal, but you're saving more lives than just your sister's. Before Kate could ask what that meant, Sarah melted back into the crowd, leaving Kate more confused than ever. The reception was a blur of champagne toasts, elegant dining, and carefully orchestrated perfection. Kate played her part flawlessly, the blushing bride, the happy wife, the woman who had supposedly found her soulmate. But all the while, questions burned in her mind. Who was Sarah really? What had she meant about saving more lives? And why did Richard keep looking at her like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve? As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Kate found herself alone with her new husband for the first time since their kiss at the altar. They stood on the terrace of the reception venue, the Manhattan skyline glittering before them like scattered diamonds. That went well, Richard said, loosening his bow tie. Did it? Kate turned to face him fully. Your sister seems nice. Funny how you never mentioned having a sister. Richard's jaw tightened. Sarah talks too much. Maybe. Or maybe you don't talk enough. Kate stepped closer, emboldened by champagne and curiosity. What did she mean about saving more lives than just my sister's? For a long moment, Richard just stared at her. In the moonlight, without the crowds and cameras, he looked younger somehow. More human. Some things are better left buried, Kate. And some things, she replied, her blue eyes flashing with determination, are better brought into the light. You want me to play the perfect wife for 3 months? Fine. But I'm not playing blind anymore. She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. Kate. When she looked back, something had changed in his expression. The mask had slipped, just slightly, revealing a glimpse of the man underneath. Tomorrow we'll talk. I promise. As Kate walked away, her wedding dress trailing behind her like liquid starlight, she realized something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just about her sister anymore, or even about the money. Richard Musk was hiding something big, and Kate Taylor had never been able to resist a good mystery. Kate had imagined many things about where Richard Musk lived, but a penthouse that looked more like a museum than a home wasn't one of them. The elevator opened directly into his apartment because of course it did, revealing a space that screamed wealth but whispered loneliness. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, while modern art worth millions hung on walls painted in cold, neutral tones. Everything was perfect, pristine, and completely devoid of personality. Welcome home, Mrs. Musk, Richard said, his voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite identify. He'd changed from his tuxedo into dark jeans and a white button-down that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less formal. It's impressive, Kate managed, still wearing her wedding dress because nobody had thought to pack her any other clothes. The ivory silk felt ridiculous in this sterile environment, like wearing a ball gown to a business meeting. Your room is down the hall, Richard continued, all business again. Maria, my housekeeper, will bring your belongings tomorrow. Tonight you can wait. Kate's blue eyes flashed. My room? Aren't we supposed to be convincing people we're madly in love? Separate bedrooms seems counterproductive. Something flickered across Richard's face. The staff is discreet, and the press doesn't have access to— The press isn't my concern, Kate interrupted, stepping closer. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, each step echoing in the vast space. Your sister's comment is— What did Sarah mean about saving more lives? Richard's jaw tightened. Kate, you should get some rest. Tomorrow. Is now, she said firmly, reaching up to pull the pins from her elaborate updo. Her golden hair tumbled over her shoulders in waves, and she saw Richard's eyes track the movement before he caught himself. "You promised we'd talk, Richard. So talk." For a long moment, they stood there in a battle of wills, her determination against his resistance. Finally, Richard walked to the bar cart and poured himself a whiskey. "Sarah is sick," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Has been for 3 years. Brain tumor. Inoperable." Kate's anger deflated like a punctured balloon. "Richard, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Nobody knows." He took a long sip of his drink. "She made me promise to keep it private. Sarah's always been stubborn. Stubborn seems to run in your family." That earned her a ghost of a smile. "The treatments aren't working anymore. She has maybe 6 months left, and she spent the last year obsessed with the idea that I need to settle down, find someone to take care of me after she's—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Kate felt her heart crack a little. "So you found a wife. So I found a solution." His gray eyes met hers, and she saw pain there, raw and carefully hidden. "Sarah needed to see me married and happy before she—" The wedding today gave her something to focus on besides dying. "And the 3 months?" Richard's laugh was bitter. "Enough time for her to pass peacefully, thinking I'm not going to be alone. After that, you get your divorce and your money. I get my inheritance, which requires me to be married, and everyone gets what they need." Kate stared at him, processing this new information. "Your inheritance depends on being married?" "My father was a traditional man with traditional ideas about family stability. The company, the fortune, all of it transfers to me only if I'm married by my 35th birthday." Richard set down his glass with more force than necessary. "Which is in 2 weeks. And if you're not married? Everything goes to charity. Sarah loses her medical care, and 5,000 employees lose their jobs when the company gets dissolved." The enormity of it hit Kate like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or family pressure. It was about survival for so many people. "Why didn't you just find someone who actually wanted to marry you?" she asked softly. "You're not exactly hideous, and you're richer than God." Richard's smile was sharp and self-deprecating. "Because I don't do relationships, Kate. I don't trust people, I don't let them close, and I sure as hell don't make promises about happily ever after. A business arrangement was cleaner. And my sister was the leverage I needed to ensure you'd go through with it," he admitted, and she saw shame flicker across his features. "I'm not proud of it." Kate walked to the window, her wedding dress rustling around her feet. The city sprawled below them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each with their own struggles and secrets. "I hate that you manipulated me," she said finally. "I know. I hate that you made me feel like I didn't have a choice. I know. And I hate that now I understand why you did it." She turned to face him, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because I would have done the same thing. For Emma, I would have moved mountains and destroyed anyone in my way." Richard stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "Kate, where is Sarah now?" "Memorial Sloan Kettering. She wanted to go home after the wedding. Said all the excitement tired her out." His voice was carefully controlled, but Kate could hear the underlying fear. "She'll be there for the next few weeks. I want to visit her." "That's not necessary. It's not about necessity," Kate interrupted. "She's my sister-in-law now, even if it's fake. And she looked so happy today, Richard. When's the last time someone was genuinely happy about something in your life?" The question hit its mark. Richard looked away, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "She can't know," he said finally, "about the arrangement. Sarah thinks we fell in love, thinks this is real. If she finds out the truth, she won't." Kate moved closer, close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken against her better judgment. "I'm a teacher, Richard. I'm very good at making people believe in stories. Even when the story isn't true." Kate reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of tension in his jaw. She felt him go still under her touch, saw his pupils dilate. "Who says it has to be completely false?" she whispered. The air between them crackled with electricity. Richard's hand came up to cover hers, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "Kate," he said, his voice rough. "This is dangerous territory." "I know." She didn't step away. "But I'm not running." For a moment that felt like forever. They stood frozen in that space between enemies and something else entirely. Then Richard's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He stepped back, checking the message, and his face went pale. "What is it?" Kate asked. "Sarah's in the hospital, emergency surgery." His hands were already reaching for his keys. "I have to go." "I'm coming with you." "Kate, you don't—" "I'm coming with you," she repeated firmly. "That's what wives do, Richard. Even fake ones." As they rushed toward the elevator, Kate realized that somewhere between the wedding kiss and this moment of crisis, the lines had begun to blur. She was no longer just playing a role. She was starting to care, and that was either going to save them both or destroy everything. The waiting room at Memorial Sloan Kettering smelled like antiseptic and false hope. Kate sat beside Richard on an uncomfortable plastic chair, still wearing her wedding dress because there hadn't been time to change. The ivory silk looked absurdly out of place among the sterile hospital surroundings, like a fairy tale princess who'd wandered into the wrong story. Her golden hair was disheveled from their frantic rush through the city, and her carefully applied makeup had long since been rubbed away by worried hands. Richard hadn't spoken since they'd arrived 3 hours ago. He sat rigid, staring at the surgery doors with an intensity that could have burned holes through steel. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and Kate could see a muscle jumping in his jaw. "She's going to be okay," Kate said softly, "for the 5th time. You don't know that." His voice was raw, stripped of all the polished businessman confidence she'd grown accustomed to. "Nobody knows that." Kate studied his profile, the sharp line of his nose, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. Without thinking, she reached over and covered his hand with hers. Richard went still. For a moment she thought he might pull away, but instead his fingers slowly uncurled and intertwined with hers. His hand was warm and calloused, unexpected evidence that the billionaire actually worked with his hands sometimes. "Tell me about her," Kate said quietly. "What was Sarah like before she got sick?" A ghost of a smile crossed Richard's face. "Unstoppable. When we were kids, she was the one climbing trees and getting into fights while I was buried in books. She's 3 years younger, but always acted like she was the older one, bossing me around." His voice grew softer. "She's the only person who's never wanted anything from me except my time." "She sounds wonderful." "She is." Richard's grip on her hand tightened. "She's the only family I have left. When our parents died in a car accident 8 years ago, Sarah was just 19. I was 24 and suddenly responsible for everything. The company, the money, taking care of her. She made it easy, though. Never complained, never acted spoiled, just believed in me when I wasn't sure I could handle it all." Kate felt her heart break a little more. "And now you're trying to take care of her the same way." "I'm failing at it." The words came out bitter and defeated. "All the money in the world, and I can't fix the one thing that matters. Richard, look at me." When he didn't respond, Kate used her free hand to gently turn his face toward her. "You gave her the most beautiful wedding today. You saw how happy she was. Sometimes taking care of someone means giving them joy, not just trying to cure them." Their eyes met, and Kate saw something crack in his carefully constructed armor. For a moment he looked younger, more vulnerable, like the 24-year-old who'd suddenly found himself responsible for everything. "Mr. Musk?" A doctor in scrubs appeared in the doorway and they both shot to their feet. "How is she?" Richard's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "The surgery went well. We were able to reduce some of the swelling, which should help with the pain and pressure. She's stable for now." Kate felt Richard's entire body sag with relief. "Can we see her?" "She's still under anesthesia, but you can sit with her. Room 304. They hurried down the hospital corridor, Kate's heels clicking against the linoleum floor. When they reached Sarah's room, Richard stopped abruptly at the doorway. Sarah looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. Her auburn hair was covered by bandages and her skin was pale against the white sheets. But she was breathing, and the steady beep of the heart monitor was the most beautiful sound Kate had ever heard. "I can't," Richard whispered, his face going white. "I can't see her like this." Kate's heart ached for him. Without hesitation, she slipped her arm around his waist, offering what support she could. "Yes, you can," she said firmly, "because she needs you, and because you're stronger than you think." Together, they walked into the room. Kate helped Richard into the chair beside Sarah's bed, then pulled up another chair for herself. Richard reached out with shaking hands to touch his sister's fingers. "Hey, troublemaker," he said softly. "You're supposed to be recovering from my wedding, not giving me heart attacks." As if summoned by his voice, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. When she saw them, a weak smile spread across her face. "Richie?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Kate? What are you doing here? You should be on your honeymoon." "Honeymoons can wait," Kate said quickly, taking Sarah's other hand. "Family comes first." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry I ruined your wedding night." "You didn't ruin anything," Richard said fiercely. "Don't you ever apologize for being sick. Ever. But you two should be celebrating starting your new life together." Kate and Richard exchanged a look over Sarah's bed. In that moment, Kate made a decision that would have shocked her 12 hours ago. "We are celebrating," she said, her voice steady and sure. "We're celebrating that you're okay, that the surgery went well, and that we're all here together. Right, husband?" Richard's eyes widened slightly at the word husband, the first time she'd used it naturally, without irony or resentment. Then something shifted in his expression, something warm and grateful and entirely too dangerous for her peace of mind. "Right," he said, his voice husky. "There's nowhere else we'd rather be." Sarah beamed at them, the happiness on her face worth more than any wedding gift. "I knew you two were perfect for each other. I could see it in the way you looked at each other during the ceremony." Kate felt heat rise in her cheeks, remembering that unexpected moment during their kiss when the world had disappeared. Judging by the way Richard was studying her face, he was remembering it too. "Sarah, you need to rest," Kate said gently. "We'll be here when you wake up." "Promise?" "Promise," Richard said without hesitation. As Sarah drifted back to sleep, Kate and Richard sat in comfortable silence, still holding hands across the hospital bed. The machines beeped steadily, and somewhere down the hall, Kate could hear the quiet bustle of night shift nurses. "Thank you," Richard said suddenly. "For what?" "For coming with me. For staying. For—" he struggled with the words. "For making her believe we're real." Kate looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was unconsciously stroking across her knuckles, at the gentle way he was watching his sister sleep. "Richard," she said quietly, "what if we stopped pretending it's all fake?" His head snapped up, eyes wide. "Kate!" "I don't mean forever," she said quickly. "I don't mean changing our arrangement. But while we're doing this, while we're married and living together and taking care of Sarah, what if we just let ourselves feel whatever this is instead of fighting it?" Richard stared at her for a long moment, and Kate could practically see the war happening behind his eyes. Caution versus hope. Fear versus possibility. "That's dangerous," he said finally. "I know." Kate's blue eyes met his steadily. "But I'm starting to think the most dangerous thing would be not trying at all." Before Richard could respond, Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like "so happy for you both." Kate and Richard looked at each other across the hospital bed, both thinking the same thing. Maybe making Sarah happy wasn't the only reason to make this marriage real. Maybe, just maybe, they were making each other happy too. Kate woke up to the smell of coffee and the unfamiliar weight of a platinum wedding band on her finger. For a moment, she lay still in the enormous guest bed, watching morning sunlight stream through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. The Egyptian cotton sheets were softer than anything she'd ever experienced, and the silence of the penthouse was so complete it felt almost oppressive after years of living with thin Brooklyn walls. Then reality crashed back. She was married to Richard Musk. They'd spent their wedding night in a hospital, and she'd basically propositioned him to make their fake marriage real. Smooth, Kate. Really smooth. She found Richard in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring out the window with a cup of coffee in his hands. His dark hair was disheveled, his white shirt wrinkled and partially unbuttoned, and there were shadows under his gray eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "How's Sarah?" Kate asked, pulling his spare shirt tighter around herself. She'd borrowed it after finally escaping her wedding dress at 3 a.m., and it hung on her like a designer nightgown, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. "Stable, awake, demanding to see you, actually." Richard turned, and Kate caught her breath at the intensity in his gaze. "She wants to have lunch today. Says she needs to get to know her new sister properly." Kate's heart did a little flip at the word sister, but she kept her voice steady. "That sounds lovely." "Kate, about last night—" "Forget it," she said quickly, moving to pour herself coffee from the expensive machine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I was emotional. You were scared. Hospital lighting makes everyone say stupid things." "Was it stupid?" The question hung in the air between them. Kate's hand stilled on the coffee cup, and she felt Richard step closer behind her. "I've been thinking about what you said," he continued, his voice low and careful. "About stopping the pretense. About letting ourselves feel whatever this is." Kate turned slowly, her blue eyes searching his face. And I think you're either very brave or completely insane." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Possibly both." Before Kate could respond, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "What is it?" Kate asked. "Photos from yesterday. The press is calling our hospital visit the most romantic wedding night ever, and proof of true love." He showed her the screen, where a tabloid headline screamed, "Billionaire's wife chooses family over honeymoon." Kate looked at the photos, her in her wedding dress, Richard's arm around her waist as they entered the hospital, both of them looking genuinely worried and connected. They looked like a couple who truly cared about each other. "We're good at this," she said softly. "Too good." Richard's eyes met hers. "Kate, if we're going to do this, really do this, we need rules." "Rules?" Richard moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "No falling in love. This is still temporary, still ends in 3 months. We're just exploring the chemistry while we're stuck together." Kate felt a stab of something that might have been disappointment. "No falling in love. Got it. And no expectations beyond the original agreement. You get your money, I get my inheritance, we both get our freedom when this is over." "Understood." Kate lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "Anything else?" "Yes." Richard reached out, tucking a strand of her golden hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent electricity shooting down her spine. "No lies between us anymore. If this is going to work, even temporarily, we have to be honest about what we want." Kate's breath caught. "What do you want, Richard?" His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone the same way he had during their wedding kiss. "Right now, I want to kiss you again. Without an audience, without cameras, without any reason except that I can't stop thinking about how you felt against me yesterday." Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's honest. Your turn." Kate looked into his eyes, those steel gray eyes that had seemed so cold when she first met him but now burned with something that made her feel reckless and alive. "I want to stop fighting what's happening between us," she admitted. "I want to see what happens when we stop pretending we're just business partners, and I want—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I want to help you take care of Sarah. Not because of our deal, but because she matters to you, and somehow that makes her matter to me too." Richard's eyes darkened. "Kate, but I have one rule of my own," she said quickly. "If we're doing this, really doing this, then you can't shut me out anymore. No more secrets, no more handling everything alone. If I'm your wife, even temporarily, Then I'm your partner. In everything. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then Richard's mouth curved in the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "Deal," he said, and kissed her. This kiss was nothing like their wedding kiss. That had been gentle, careful, performed for an audience. This was hungry, desperate, 3 weeks of tension and attraction finally finding release. Kate's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Richard backed her against the kitchen counter, his body pressing against hers as if he couldn't bear even an inch of distance. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kate felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "So," she said, trying to catch her breath. "What now?" "Now," Richard said, his voice rough. "We go see Sarah. Together. As partners." He paused, then added with a wicked smile that transformed his entire face. "And tonight we have a proper wedding night." Kate felt heat flood her cheeks. "Richard. Too fast?" She looked at this man who 12 hours ago had been her enemy and somehow impossibly had become something else entirely. He was still dangerous, still complicated, still carrying more baggage than anyone should have to bear. But he was also brave enough to risk honesty, gentle enough to love his sister fiercely, and vulnerable enough to let Kate see behind his carefully constructed walls. "No," she said, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him again. "Not too fast. Just perfectly timed." Later, as they prepared to leave for the hospital, Kate in clothes that had finally been delivered from her old apartment, Richard in a fresh suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Kate caught sight of them in the hallway mirror. They looked like a couple, a real couple. And for the first time since this whole crazy situation began, Kate allowed herself to wonder, what if 3 months wasn't enough? What if she was already in danger of breaking Richard's most important rule? What if she was falling in love with her fake husband? The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as Richard took her hand and smiled at her, really smiled, with warmth and affection, and something that looked suspiciously like hope, Kate realized she might be okay with being terrified. After all, the best adventures always started with a little fear. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Kate had almost forgotten it was supposed to be temporary. Almost. She stood in Richard's home office, staring at the contract in her hands, the original contract that outlined their fake marriage deal. She'd found it accidentally while looking for a book Sarah had mentioned, and now the black and white terms seemed to mock her from the expensive letterhead. Marriage to be dissolved after exactly 3 months. No emotional attachments expected or desired. Payment of $3 million upon completion. Her signature at the bottom looked foreign now, like it belonged to a different person entirely. A person who hadn't spent the last 3 weeks waking up next to Richard, sharing coffee and quiet conversations, watching him light up whenever Sarah smiled. A person who hadn't fallen completely, hopelessly in love with her fake husband. "Kate?" Richard's voice from the doorway made her jump. He looked tired but content, having just returned from a board meeting where he'd announced their marriage to the company executives. "What are you doing in here?" Kate quickly folded the contract, but not before Richard saw what she was holding. His expression immediately shuddered. "Found some light reading?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I was looking for that poetry book Sarah mentioned, and I saw this on your desk." Kate held up the contract, her heart hammering. "Richard, we need to talk." "About what?" But his defensive posture told her he knew exactly what. "About the fact that tomorrow marks 1 month of marriage, which means we're already a third of the way to our expiration date." Kate's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "About the fact that we've been playing house so convincingly that I think we've forgotten this has an end date." Richard's jaw tightened. "I haven't forgotten anything." The words hit Kate like a slap. After 3 weeks of shared laughter, stolen kisses, and quiet intimacy, his sudden coldness felt like whiplash. "Really?" she challenged. "Because last night when you told me you loved how I looked in your shirt, when you made love to me like I was the only woman in the world, when you whispered that you couldn't imagine your mornings without me, that was all just..." "What?" "Acting. It was good sex, Kate. Don't romanticize it." Kate flinched as if he'd struck her. The man standing before her now was a stranger. Cold, distant, completely different from the Richard who'd held her through thunderstorms and laughed at her terrible cooking attempts. "You're lying," she said quietly. "Am I?" Richard moved to his desk, putting physical distance between them. "We had a deal, Kate. A business arrangement. Just because we've been enjoying the fringe benefits doesn't change the fundamental terms." "The fundamental terms," Kate repeated, her voice rising. "Right. Because God forbid Richard Musk actually feel something genuine for another human being." "Don't." His voice was sharp, warning. "Don't what? Don't point out that you're terrified of letting anyone get close? Don't mention that the second things get real you retreat behind your billionaire Ice King act? You knew what this was from the beginning." "No, Richard. I knew what you said it was. But what it actually became, what we became, that was never part of any contract." Richard's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. His face went white. "What is it?" Kate asked, her anger immediately replaced by concern. "Sarah's being rushed back into surgery. Something's wrong." All their fighting suddenly seemed petty and insignificant. Kate grabbed her purse without hesitation. "Let's go." But Richard was already shaking his head. "No, this isn't your problem." Kate stared at him in disbelief. "Not my problem? Richard, she's my sister-in-law. I love her." "She's not really your sister-in-law," Richard said brutally. "And this isn't really love. It's convenience, Kate. It's all just convenience." The words hung in the air between them like poison. Kate felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You know what?" she said, her voice deadly calm. "You're right. This is convenient. Convenient for a coward who'd rather push everyone away than risk actually caring about them." "Kate, no." She held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm done. You want to handle this alone? Fine. You want to pretend the last 3 weeks meant nothing? Great. But don't you dare diminish what Sarah and I have just because you're too scared to admit that maybe, just maybe, some good things in your life aren't transactions." She headed for the door, then turned back one last time. "I'll be at the hospital. Not because of our contract, not because you want me there, but because Sarah matters to me. And if you can't understand the difference between duty and love, then maybe you deserve to be alone after all." The hospital waiting room was becoming too familiar. Kate sat in the same uncomfortable plastic chair she'd occupied a month ago, but this time she was alone. Richard was somewhere in the building. She'd seen him talking intensely with doctors when she arrived, but he might as well have been on another planet. "Kate?" Sarah's weak voice made her look up. Richard's sister was being wheeled back from surgery, looking pale but alert. "Hey, you," Kate said, forcing a smile as she stood. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck that was driven by another truck." Sarah managed a weak grin. "Where's Richie?" Kate's heart clenched. "He's handling some things. He'll be here soon." Sarah studied her face with the sharp perception that ran in the Musk family. "You two had a fight." It wasn't a question, and Kate didn't bother denying it. "Yeah, we did." "About me?" "About..." Kate struggled for words. "About what's real and what isn't." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Kate, please don't tell me you're having doubts about my brother. He's not perfect, but he loves you so much it scares him." Kate felt her own tears threaten. "Sarah, he spent his whole life believing that everyone who gets close to him either wants something or leaves." Sarah continued urgently. "Our parents died. His business partners betrayed him. Even his college girlfriend turned out to be after his money. But with you, Kate, I've never seen him happy like this. Please don't give up on him." Before Kate could respond, Richard appeared in the doorway. He looked haggard, exhausted, and when his eyes met Kate's, she saw raw pain there. "The surgery went well," he said quietly. "They were able to relieve more pressure. You should rest now, Sarah." "Not until you two stop being idiots," Sarah said firmly, looking between them. "Sit down, both of you." "Sarah, you need to sleep." "I need my family to stop fighting," Sarah interrupted. her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I may be dying, but I'm not blind. You two are miserable, and it's not because you don't love each other. Kate and Richard exchanged a look across Sarah's hospital bed, the same bed where they'd first decided to stop pretending their marriage was purely business. I'm going to say something, and you're both going to listen, Sarah continued. Life is short, shorter for some of us than others. And love, real, messy, complicated love, is rare. If you have it, if you found it with each other, then you fight for it. You don't throw it away because it's scary or because it wasn't part of your original plan. She looked directly at Richard. And you, big brother, stop pushing away the best thing that ever happened to you just because you're afraid of losing it. You might lose it anyway, but at least you'll have had something real. Then she turned to Kate. And you, sister-in-law, stop letting him push you away. If you love him, really love him, then prove it. Stay. Fight. Make him believe that not everyone leaves. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Sarah's monitors. Kate looked at Richard, seeing past his walls to the scared, lonely man underneath. I do love him, Kate said quietly, her eyes never leaving Richard's face. I love him even when he's being an impossible, stubborn, self-sabotaging fool. Richard's carefully constructed mask finally cracked. Kate, I love you too, he said, the words seeming to tear from somewhere deep inside him. And that terrifies me more than losing everything else combined. Sarah smiled, looking more peaceful than she had in months. There. Was that so hard? As if on cue, she fell asleep, leaving Kate and Richard alone with the truth finally hanging between them. They had 1 month left on their contract. But maybe, Kate thought as Richard reached for her hand across Sarah's bed, maybe some contracts were meant to be rewritten. 2 weeks later, Kate woke up to find Richard already gone from their bed. She found him in his office, surrounded by legal documents and looking like he hadn't slept in days. The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the tension in his shoulders and the new lines around his eyes. Planning our divorce already? Kate asked, trying to keep her voice light despite the fear clawing at her chest. Richard looked up, and Kate's heart sank at the exhaustion in his gray eyes. The board is getting suspicious about the timeline of our marriage. They want to see the prenup, understand the legal framework. If they discover this was temporary from the beginning, they'll know it was fake, Kate finished, and I'll lose everything. The company, the inheritance, Sarah's medical care. Richard ran a hand through his hair. My father's lawyers were thorough. The marriage has to be real, permanent, entered into with genuine intent. Kate sank into the chair across from his desk, the weight of their situation settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. So what are you saying? I'm saying we have a choice. We can end this as planned in 2 weeks. You take your money, and I figure out another way to save the company. Or? Richard's eyes met hers, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified all at once. Or we make it real. Completely real. No expiration date, no contract, no safety net. Just us. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. This was what she'd been hoping for, dreaming about. But now that it was being offered, the magnitude of it overwhelmed her. Richard, she said carefully, are you asking me to stay married to you because you love me or because it's convenient for your inheritance? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Richard stood slowly, moving around the desk to kneel beside her chair. I'm asking, he said, taking her hands in his. Because the thought of you leaving, of going back to a life that doesn't include waking up next to you every morning, makes me want to burn the whole world down. I'm asking because I love you, Kate. Not your signature on a contract, not your ability to play a role, but you, your terrible morning hair, your laugh when you think something is genuinely funny, the way you make Sarah light up just by walking into a room. Kate felt tears sting her eyes. And if I say no, if I want my freedom, my $3 million, my old life back? Richard's grip on her hands tightened almost imperceptibly. Then I let you go. And I spend the rest of my life knowing I was lucky enough to love you, even if I wasn't lucky enough to keep you. Before Kate could respond, Richard's phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. "Take it," Kate said quietly. Richard answered, putting it on speaker. Sarah's voice filled the room, weaker than usual but determined. "Stop whatever you're doing and get down here, both of you. Now." "Sarah, what's wrong?" Richard was already reaching for his jacket. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Just come, please." 20 minutes later, they stood in Sarah's hospital room, which had been transformed. Somehow, Sarah had convinced the nursing staff to help her create something magical. Fairy lights twinkled around the windows, flowers filled every available surface, and soft music played from a small speaker. "What is all this?" Kate asked, wonder in her voice. Sarah was sitting up in bed, looking more alert than she had in weeks. "This," she said with a smile that reminded Kate so much of Richard it took her breath away, "is your real wedding." "Sarah," Richard started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know about the contract. I've known from the beginning." Kate felt the blood drain from her face. "How?" "Because I know my brother. Richard doesn't do spontaneous romance. He doesn't meet someone and marry them 3 weeks later. He plans everything, controls everything, trusts no one." Sarah's eyes softened. "Except he trusted you enough to bring you here that first night. He let you see him scared and vulnerable, and that's when I knew." "Knew what?" Richard asked quietly. "That this wasn't just business anymore. Maybe it started that way, but somewhere along the line you two fell in love for real." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "And I've been waiting for you to figure it out." Kate sank into the chair beside Sarah's bed. "So you know everything? About the inheritance, the timeline, all of it?" "Honey, I helped write the original plan." Sarah's confession hit them like a bombshell. "Richard came to me 2 months ago, panicking about Dad's marriage clause. We brainstormed together, decided a temporary arrangement would solve everyone's problems. Your sister's medical bills, his inheritance requirements. My peace of mind, knowing he wouldn't be alone." Richard stared at his sister in shock. "You knew? This whole time?" "Of course I knew. But I also knew something you didn't." Sarah reached for both their hands. "I knew that if you found the right person, if you let yourself be vulnerable even in a fake relationship, you might accidentally find something real." Kate felt tears streaming down her face. "You manipulated us." "I gave you a push," Sarah corrected gently. "The love? That was all you two." "Sarah," Richard's voice was rough with emotion, "why didn't you tell us?" "Because you needed to choose each other freely, not because of contracts or inheritance clauses or dying sisters' wishes, but because you genuinely want to build a life together." Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, and Kate immediately moved to help her. "Which brings me to why you're here," Sarah continued. "I want to give you something. A wedding gift." She reached into her bedside table and pulled out an envelope. "This is a letter to Dad's lawyers, signed and witnessed by 3 doctors, stating that your marriage is genuine, entered into with sincere intent, and should be honored in perpetuity, regardless of timeline." Richard's eyes widened. "Sarah, you can't." "I can, and I did. This removes the pressure, removes the deadline, removes everything except the one question that actually matters." Sarah looked between them seriously. "Do you want to stay married because you love each other, or don't you?" The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of hospital life. Kate looked at Richard, seeing all his walls finally, completely down. He looked terrified and hopeful and so full of love it took her breath away. "I have one condition," Kate said finally. "Name it," Richard said immediately. "No more secrets, no more contracts, no more business arrangements disguised as relationships." Kate's voice grew stronger. "If we do this, we do it like normal people. We date, we fight, we make up, we figure it out as we go." "Kate," Richard said, moving closer, "I don't know how to be normal people." Kate laughed through her tears. "Then I guess we'll learn together." "Is that a yes?" Sarah asked, practically bouncing in her hospital bed despite her condition. Kate looked at Richard. This complicated, damaged, wonderful man who'd started as her captor and somehow became her heart. "Ask me properly," she said. Richard dropped to one knee beside her chair, pulling a ring box from his pocket. Not the enormous diamond from their fake engagement, but a simple, elegant band that looked like it had been chosen with love, not price tags. "Kate Taylor Musk," he said, his voice shaking. "Will you stay married to me? Not because of money or contracts or convenient arrangements, but because I love you and I want to spend whatever time we have, whether that's 50 years or 50 days, building something real with you." Kate looked down at this man who'd given her everything, love, family, purpose, hope, and realized that somewhere along the way, the fake had become more real than anything she'd ever experienced. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I'll stay married to you, Richard Musk." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sarah started clapping, and Kate realized that for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Kate stood in the kitchen of their penthouse, flour in her blonde hair and frosting on her apron, putting the finishing touches on what was definitely going to be the most lopsided birthday cake in Manhattan history. "It's supposed to be a castle?" Richard asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and peering over her shoulder at her creation. "It's abstract," Kate said defensively, leaning back against his chest. "Sarah will love it." "Sarah will pretend to love it because she adores you," Richard corrected, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Just like the rest of us." Kate turned in his arms, studying his face. The perpetual tension that had lived in his shoulders for years was gone, replaced by something she'd never thought she'd see in Richard Musk. Peace. His gray eyes were warm, crinkled at the corners from smiling more in the past 6 months than he probably had in his entire adult life. "The rest of us?" Kate asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, there's me, obviously. Sarah, despite your questionable baking skills. Maria thinks you walk on water because you actually thank her for things. The doorman lights up every time you remember his daughter's name." Richard's hand settled on her hips, pulling her closer. "Even the board of directors has stopped referring to you as that woman Musk married and started calling you our secret weapon." Kate laughed. It was true. Her background in education had proven unexpectedly valuable when Richard's company decided to launch a literacy initiative for underprivileged kids. What had started as Kate wanting something meaningful to do had turned into a full-scale program that was already changing lives. "Speaking of the board," Richard continued, his expression growing more serious, "they want to make the education program permanent. Full funding, dedicated staff, you as the director." Kate's eyes widened. "Richard, that's incredible. But are you sure they're not just doing it to please me?" Richard shook his head. "Kate, you've increased company morale by 30%, generated more positive press than our PR firm managed in 5 years, and created a program that's already being copied by our competitors. They want you because you're brilliant, not because you're married to me." Before Kate could respond, the elevator dinged, announcing Sarah's arrival. Kate quickly stepped away from Richard to check her appearance. They'd learned that Sarah had an uncanny ability to sense when they'd been doing anything more romantic than holding hands, and she took great delight in teasing them about it. "Happy birthday," Kate called as Sarah emerged from the elevator, looking healthier than she had in over a year. The experimental treatment she'd started 3 months ago was working. Slowly, but working. Her auburn hair had grown back in soft curls and there was color in her cheeks again. "Oh my God," Sarah said, catching sight of the cake. "Kate, what is that supposed to be?" "A castle," Kate and Richard said in unison, then looked at each other and burst out laughing. "It's abstract," Kate added weakly. Sarah grinned. "I love it. It's perfectly imperfect, just like you two." As they settled around the dining table, which Kate had insisted on actually using instead of Richard's previous habit of eating standing up in his office, Kate marveled at how normal this had become. 6 months ago, she'd been a broke teacher with a sick sister and no prospects. Now she was sitting in a penthouse with her husband and sister-in-law, celebrating life and love and the kind of family she'd never dared to dream about. "I have news," Sarah announced as Richard cut the cake with surgical precision, trying to make Kate's architectural disaster look presentable. Good news or we need to sit down news? Richard asked, immediately alert. Good news. Great news, actually. Sarah's smile was radiant. Dr. Morrison called this morning. The latest scans show the tumor has shrunk by 40%. They're officially classifying me as in remission. The silence that followed was profound. Then Richard dropped the cake server and crossed to his sister in 3 quick strides, pulling her into a hug so fierce Kate was worried he might break her. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice muffled against Sarah's hair. "I'm sure. I'm going to live, Richie. I'm going to live long enough to embarrass you at your real wedding anniversary, spoil your children, and tell inappropriate stories about you to anyone who'll listen." Kate felt tears streaming down her face as she watched Richard hold his sister, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. This man who'd been so afraid of losing everyone he loved was finally getting to keep someone. "There's more," Sarah said when Richard finally released her. "I've decided to go back to school, finish my degree, maybe become a social worker. I want to help kids who are dealing with illness, show them that life doesn't end with a diagnosis." "Sarah, that's wonderful," Kate said, wiping her eyes. "What changed your mind?" Sarah looked between Kate and Richard, her expression soft. "I learned that the best way to honor the time you have is to spend it building something meaningful. You two showed me that." They spent the rest of the evening celebrating, eating too much cake, sharing stories, planning Sarah's return to college and Kate's new job. As the night wound down and Sarah prepared to leave for her own apartment, she'd moved out 2 months ago declaring that newlyweds needed privacy, Kate felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly to Kate as they hugged goodbye. "For what?" "For saving my brother. For showing him that love doesn't have to be a business transaction." Sarah pulled back, looking Kate in the eyes. "You know, when I helped him plan that fake marriage scheme, I was hoping for exactly this outcome, but I never imagined it would be this beautiful." After Sarah left, Kate and Richard stood on their terrace, looking out over the city lights. Kate was wrapped in one of Richard's sweaters, his arms around her waist, and everything felt perfect in a way that should have been impossible for something that started with blackmail and deception. "Any regrets?" Richard asked softly. "About marrying a man who basically kidnapped me into wedlock?" Kate pretended to consider it. "Nah, best kidnapping ever." Richard laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I love you, Kate Musk." "I love you too, Richard Musk." Kate turned in his arms, looking up at this man who'd started as her villain and become her hero. "Even if you did make me sign the worst contract in history. Want to renegotiate the terms?" Kate stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, tasting forever in the sweetness of his lips. "I think the current terms are perfect. No expiration date, no exit clauses. Just us figuring it out as we go. For better or worse? For richer or poorer? In sickness and in health? Till death do us part," Kate finished, then grinned. "Though let's be honest, with your money and my stubbornness, death's going to have to work pretty hard to part us." Richard spun her around on the terrace, both of them laughing like teenagers, the city sparkling below them like scattered diamonds. They'd found their happily ever after in the most unlikely place, in a fake marriage that had turned real, in a business deal that had become a love story, in 2 broken people who'd figured out how to be whole together. And as Richard carried Kate inside, both of them already planning their future, Kate realized that sometimes the best love stories were the ones that started with the worst possible beginning. After all, anyone could fall in love under perfect circumstances. It took something special to fall in love despite impossible ones. 1 year later, the second wedding was everything the first one hadn't been: small, intimate, and completely genuine. Kate stood in Sarah's garden, wearing a simple white sundress instead of a designer gown, surrounded by the people who actually mattered. Sarah, radiant and healthy; Emma, who'd made a full recovery and was starting her senior year of high school; Kate's parents, who'd finally stopped asking if Richard was really in love with her; and a handful of close friends. Richard waited for her under an arch of wildflowers, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, looking more relaxed and happy than she'd ever seen him. When she reached him, he took her hands, and spoke the vows they'd written together. Promises about choosing each other every day, about building something beautiful from something broken, about loving without contracts or conditions. "I promise," Richard said, his voice carrying across the small gathering, "to never again try to solve my problems by hiring a fake wife." "And I promise," Kate replied, grinning, "to never again marry someone for money. Unless you get significantly richer, in which case we'll discuss it." The laughter from their tiny audience was warm and genuine, nothing like the polite applause from their first wedding. When they kissed, it was soft and sweet and full of the kind of love that grows slowly and lasts forever. Later, as they danced to music played on Sarah's old stereo, Kate caught sight of herself in the window reflection. Blonde hair tousled by the breeze, simple dress wrinkled from hugging everyone, face glowing with happiness. She looked nothing like the perfect bride from their first wedding. She looked exactly like herself. "Happy?" Richard asked, spinning her under his arm. "Ridiculously," Kate replied. "You?" "Completely." Richard pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Though I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed." "About what?" "This marriage is going to be much more expensive than our first one. No 3-month limit means I'm stuck buying you anniversary presents forever." Kate laughed, the sound carrying across the garden where Sarah was teaching Emma how to make flower crowns, and Kate's parents were actually smiling at their son-in-law. "Worth every penny?" Kate asked. "Worth every penny," Richard confirmed, then kissed her again as the sun set over their small, perfect, completely real celebration of love. Some fairy tales started with, "Once upon a time." The best ones started with, "This is never going to work," and ended with, "But somehow it did."